Ethical in Pakistan have suspended several trains departing from the capital Islamabad as thousands of Islamists from a banned organisation continue to march on the city. Key junctions and bridges leading to Islamabad and Rawalpindi cities have been blocked to stop members of the Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan. Shumaila Jaffrey reports.
The protesters are still advancing towards Islamabad, despite warnings by the government that strict action will be taken against them. Hundreds spent the night in Gujranwala city in Punjab before continuing on their way. Police and paramilitary rangers have been deployed at a nearby bridge to try to stop the march. Several key bridges on the route into the capital have been blocked with shipping containers, and trenches have been dug across the main highway. The government says that the TLP has crossed the red line and that it will not be allowed to hold the country hostage.
BBC News. A British government minister has suggested that Britain could retaliate against France in an escalating dispute over post-Brexit fishing rights. George Eustace described language being used by France as completely inflammatory and warned that, as he put it, two could play at that game. France has detained a British trawler and has threatened further action unless more French boats are given licences to fish in British waters. A medical organisation in Sudan has said it's impossible to know the number of people killed and wounded during the public protests against Monday's coup. The Central Committee of Sudanese Doctors said at least 8 had definitely died, but it accused militias of causing bloody incidents in several cities, using live bullets against unarmed civilians, including children and the elderly. The top American diplomat in Taiwan has said the United States remains committed to helping the island defend itself. At her first news conference since taking up the post in July, Sandra Audkirk described the US commitment to Taiwan as rock solid.
We continue to have a shared and abiding interest in peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. The U.S. considers this central to the security and stability of the broader Indo-Pacific region and to the United States, and we are deeply concerned by ongoing PRC efforts to undermine that stability.
Ambassador Audkirk's comments come at a time of rising tension with China. The Japanese island of Okinawa has begun a major clean-up operation to remove pumice stone that's accumulated on its coast after a huge underwater volcanic eruption. The floating stone has covered the white sand beaches of the island's resorts, blocked ports, wrecked boats and killed farmed fish. It's coated several areas of the coast in a grey blanket, and officials say it will take weeks to remove the pumice. That's the latest. BBC News.
天天在一起，天天用心听，听见台北的声音。FM 93.1，幸福永远属于你。
公民总主笔，
方恩格时间。
谁当家？
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 你当家？
谁当家？
谁当家？谁当家？
谁当家？我当家。你当家？我当家。
我当家。
到底谁当家？你来当家。
Residence Messenger on Taipei Broadcasting Station. Our guest today is Song Shu Kang, one of the founders of a new website called ChineseHeritage.com, which displays a very interesting array of Chinese art and a lot of information about Chinese art going back many centuries, if not thousands of years. But before we talk more about that, we'll talk more also about Mr. Song's background as an architect and living and working around the world. So Shu Kang, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ross. Very kind of you to invite me.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about your own background. Where were you born?
I was born in Hong Kong.
Kind of like former President Ma?
Yes.
Not the same age, though. You're a little younger.
No. But yes, a lot of people were born there and then moved to Taipei. But anyway, actually, I was born in 1962, a bit younger than President Ma. Okay, but 1962. That's like 13 years after the Communist Revolution, 1949. And then so I came to Taiwan very briefly at that time in 1967. because of the riots in Hong Kong, because of the Cultural Revolution happening in mainland China. And then, of course, the Red Guards in Hong Kong tried to kind of topple the British colonial rule. And then, so of course, for people like my parents who fled mainland China, they thought, wow, that's the end of Hong Kong. So we came to Taipei, and then I studied my kindergarten here for a year. And then, of course, everything calmed down in Hong Kong. And then we moved back to Hong Kong. That's it.
So they didn't feel the need to remain in Taiwan. They preferred Hong Kong.
Well, because at that time, the business community is more active in Hong Kong. Like Taiwan is a bit different at that time. So they thought that okay, but it's a very interesting time because at that time, the British government asked the mainland communists whether they would want to take Hong Kong back, but of course they declined at that time because they believed that it's useless for them, and of course they were in the middle of the Cultural Revolution, so it was that period,
Do you ever bump into some of those kindergarten classmates from Taipei? They say, hey, what happened to you? You kind of disappeared from Taiwan and now you're back decades later.
I don't think kindergarten kids have such long memory, and thank God for that. But
they can remember by your name, which is somewhat unique.
But I think it's funny because of course I bump into a lot of students from that school as well. Later on, I still have a lot of friends from that school, but of course we wouldn't even remember which year or whatever. Taipei is a small place, and so of course it's socially you see people.
When you were growing up, what did you want to be?
At that time, it's a surprise for a lot of people. I actually seriously wanted to be a soldier, I mean...
In whose army?
Well, that's the thing. That's a very good question. The point is, it's like the Cubans in Miami, waiting for the fall of Castro. It's that kind of frame of mind, So that's it, So that was my youthful years, Yeah.
And then you went to boarding school in Scotland. What was that like?
Oh, it's very... it's a very conservative, it's more conservative even than those in England, So, I mean, it's like British boarding school.
So it's like all the stereotypes, like something out of a movie?
Yes, it's like it's a boys' school, to start off. I mean, and then you have all the stuff, rugby, cricket, and that kind of stuff. And then, of course, it's like Scottish schools are very oriented towards sports, and it's something you see in movies.
Were there other students from Hong Kong or Asia?
No,
or were you one of the few?
One from Thailand, and that's about it.
Was he a prince or something like that? Was he?
Well, they're all kind of a bit exotic,
So what? So this is in the 70s, and what were your interactions with the European students like?
Well, actually, I had a few very good friends, and actually the school was very kind. Actually, because I was kind of the only Chinese, so to speak, they gave a lot of exceptions. I was kind of lucky in that sense, So, an example, they wouldn't expect me to be very good at rugby because I've never played that, before going there and things like that. So I think I was. But one thing I kind of observed about boarding school in general is that you either like it or actually you either love it or hate it. I mean, because I think there's a great expectation to conform. I think that's an element that I didn't particularly enjoy. So it's not necessary to do with your ethnic background, but it's rather to do with the system. You see, it's a system that expects you to conform and have a certain mode. But I think I'm more inclined towards more individualism. So. Yeah.
Is that your way of saying you never got into the rugby?
I was never that crowd,
But eventually you did study architecture. So when you were at the boarding school in Scotland, and there's this focus on sports, but academically, what did they emphasize? Was there, because I think of these boarding schools in the United Kingdom as also having a great focus on the classics and literature and Latin and things like that. But what about the sciences?
Well, again, I'm personally not inclined to the sciences, so I read a lot. I won a few of the kind of prizes there, like history prize, religious studies prize, and that sort of stuff. So I was more inclined towards the humanities, more interested in the arts. And but it's a great place for reading. I mean, they have a good library. And then, and also, we would sneak into Edinburgh and go to the public library there, and then borrowed books from. And then also, there's a very good bookshop there called Thin's. I remember, a very famous bookshop there. So it's and then of course it's a kind of quiet place, comparing to Hong Kong or any other big cities. It's a small kind of town, really. And so you have a lot of opportunity to read, and think. So it's rather meditative, I think.
And then you went to architecture school in London, a very well-known school, the Bartlett, which is one of the more famous architecture schools around the world. What motivated you to study architecture?
Well, it's like the last few years of my secondary school, I thought, what could I study, so architecture was something that came to the mind only in the very last moment. But actually turned out, I think, one of the great education opportunities, because architecture actually, it's a training for a way of thinking, thinking on a very diverse level. And that's a great education for a person, I think, whether you actually eventually practice or not is another thing, but it's a great training. And I think, Bartlett, and then I also went to the Architectural Association London. And so these two schools, I think they took a more liberal view of architecture.
It's interesting you say that, because I checked the website of the Bartlett, and actually they claim that they set the agenda for architecture, which is a very bold claim for a school in any field to make. So would you say the architecture agenda has become liberal because they're
I think it's a very European thing too, because you would probably see less of that in the United States, because I think the European tradition of architecture, it's the mother of all arts, historically speaking. So that's why architecture is placed in it's a very all-encompassing sort of level, because you can look at architecture from many levels. You can look at it from the urban level, you can look at it from the kind of building level, you can look at it on a social level, and so I think that's why architecture in that sort of like Bartlett or the Architectural Association, you actually see a far more liberal view of architecture, that design is something that is applied to improve human lives rather than anything, actually. And you can improve human lives on many levels, and that's why I think in European architecture, a lot of architects also design like a lot of objects, furniture and that sort of stuff. And that's kind of you wouldn't see that in such a common level in the United States, I think.
When you finished your architecture education, did you envision yourself as working in an architecture firm in London, and that was going to be it? So your family had escaped from China, then they went to Hong Kong and decided they needed to escape from there for a while, went to Taiwan, back to Hong Kong, then you went to Scotland. Did you envision, okay, I have this this good qualification, I'm just going to have a nice quiet life designing buildings in London?
Well, I never really thought about it like that, because I think, I thought that coming back to China, coming back to, China, whatever that means. I remember many years ago, I worked very briefly as an intern in New York with a very, distinguished architect called Mr. I.M. Pei. And then because I got this job through my father's friend, Mr. Morley Cho. And then, of course, Morley Cho was a very close friend of Mr. I.M. Pei. And then so, anyway, he asked me to go into his office once, and then we talked a lot about politics, architecture, etc., etc. And then he said, "Oh, well, would you stay in the West, or the America or wherever?" Then, I said to him, I want to go back to China, because I think there was this emotional tie. But of course, what really surprised me, I'm now talking about the, late 70s or early 80s, whatever, something way back. And then, of course, what really surprised everyone was that China is still now under communist rule. That really I think that's something totally, for people of my generation, we never really thought that would be the case, we thought that there would be an end somewhere, Yes.
Also, did Mr. Pei say, you want to be working in China? I'm working on a Bank of China building.
Yes. Actually, the reason he asked me to go to his office was actually to talk about that particularly, Yes.
It certainly is one of his landmark buildings around the world. But given your own experience with the architecture, being educated and then working in that field, what about for aspiring architects here in Taiwan? Is this something that they're best served by studying outside of Taiwan and then coming back to Taiwan and working?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer, really, because I think it's how you view architecture. Because if you view it as a kind of profession, then I think it really doesn't matter where you study it, because it's as a profession. I'm sure the universities here are very capable and they're doing a very good job teaching the students. But if you see architecture as an art, then it's a bit complicated because you need a kind of cultural environment and artistic environment to understand, because fundamentally we're still talking about Western architecture. Wherever you go, Bartlett, Harvard, Architectural Association, it's all about Western architecture. So if you want to kind of learn the craft of Western architecture, you have to understand the cultural roots of it, that's the thing. And then, of course, so that makes it complicated. So I think from that perspective, then probably being in the West and you have an understanding of the cultural ethos of of Western art, it's actually, more advantageous. But, that's a very personal thing, to look at,
How would you, now be frank, how would you characterize the architecture here in Taipei?
Well, a lot of people work very hard on it, Right?
That's very diplomatic.
And then, of course, the thing is, you see, it's not just Taiwan, Asian cities, it's very complicated because you see in, say, America or Europe, citizens, generally speaking, on the whole, they are involved in the process of architecture. They have a say. If you build a skyscraper in New York, a lot of citizen groups would be consulted. They would have a say about the aesthetics of it. But a lot of Asian cities here and other cities too, citizens are kind of ignorant of architecture. They have no opinion whatsoever. So they let it be, you see. And if you go to the government authorities who approve buildings, again, most of them are rather kind of, unsure what architecture is. But that's different in England, you see. A lot of, people who work in government authorities are very, informed about architecture. So I think that's why sometimes in the West, you have the opportunities with civic buildings, can be very creative, And of course, most well-known architects take the opportunity in the West, to do civic buildings because they're more opportunities for creativity. But here it's a bit different, So again, you see, it's very practical. It's a very pragmatic process. So through that very pragmatic process, and most clients are kind of not informed either, So that's not the problem of the architects, but it's more the problem of the society as a whole, because architecture, by the end of it, day is a very Western thing. It's something that is, of course, in China we have architecture, for millenniums, but the thing is, it's a craft tradition, and it's something that we are now quite disconnected with, So all the architects now who are practicing a style, a mode, a way of thinking that's from the Western tradition. I think that's the thing,
I've noticed, at least in my decades in Taipei, that it seems that whether it's residential, but especially with commercial buildings, that there's more and more nowadays a desire by the client, often a big property developer or a corporation building a new headquarters, to have some style, or they're not just building a box anymore here in Taipei. So the skyline is changing in Taipei, and there are buildings that have a personality, maybe more so than in the past.
Yes, of course, because I think people's expectations are changing too, and I think a lot of architects and certain clients, of course, have higher expectations about the way they live, the environment. And also I think it's to do with the post-war world, too, because the post-war world, everything was very economic. It was, it's like very constrained, economically. And so for many decades, people couldn't really splash out or do something lavish. They have to stick to very fundamental way of building. So I think that's also changing, because of the relative prosperity being, created in the last 20, 30 years in Asia, So a lot of things are changing. I think, of course, a lot of architects themselves are having like far greater expectations, So it's the situation is kind of, improving. But I think that the important thing is to hopefully we can educate the society at large, citizens generally speaking, to have higher expectation about the way they live.
Although some of you mentioned civic buildings, including here in Taipei, but other parts of Taiwan as well. Very often civic buildings are not very architecturally pleasing. I think of buildings like sports centers, for example, here in Taipei. It might be very utilitarian, and of course the equipment inside is all very good, but outwardly some of these civic buildings are still not very nice. Maybe they go for the low bidder architect, I don't know.
Well, I mean, I have to kind of mention, the Mr. C.C. Yang. He designed the Grand Hotel and the Chiang Kai-shek Memorial and the Opera House Theater. And I was privileged to work for him for many years, when I first came back to Taiwan. And he was the master of traditional Chinese architecture. And I think when we look back to that era, his buildings still stand out the most, actually, far superior to many of the buildings you see around. I mean, but unfortunately, because people are kind of prejudiced, people, even locally, they don't really look so high upon traditional Chinese architecture. And that's a problem we have about classicism, you see. So
what about the preservation of older buildings here in Taipei? That seems to be a trend that we're seeing more and more of, a willingness to preserve it. More often than not, it gets turned into some kind of cafe. But that's pleasant as well. It's better than knocking it over.
That's right. Yeah.
How do you view efforts to preserve and renovate and repurpose what remains of older buildings?
I think that's a very commendable approach. But the thing is, as you say, it's boring to have all that cafe. I mean, you wish there's something different, right? You wish there's something more creative content, more interesting or more challenging content for people. And it's not just called cafe, but that's something, it's something that we should, be exploring more. What can we do to provoke the society into thinking deeper about the environment they live in rather than just having a cafe.
One of the things I've also noticed recently is whereas those sort of one-story Japanese homes were turned into cafes, but 2 to 3 story shop houses, more recently people seem to be willing to renovate those and turn those into stores, for example.
Yes. I mean, because of course there's a trend that they're more like products, more creative products be made, and of course, I mean, before the corona pandemic virus, tourism was on the rise, but of course now in the last 2 years it's all gone. So there was an opportunity to encourage more creative young people to do more like industrial design, product design for, to create more products,
You also have some experience with interior design as well. What's the trends there, whether on the residential side or the commercial side?
Well, I think, trend is, it's a kind of, yes, I mean, because people, here they are always curious. They will look through magazines and all that. There's actually most people are quite up to date, But the thing is, of course, it gets a bit boring because, you're always looking at something that you want to emulate,
you go to your friend's place.
Yes,
you go to the architect and say, I want to put an interior design. I want the same thing.
Yes, that's the same thing.
I want the same platform in the living room.
Yes. I think the thing about your own living environment for residential purpose is that I think it should be very individualistic, That's the thing. It has to be individualistic. And hopefully people are and in fact, if people are so individualistic, they don't really need anyone to do the interior for them because they have very clear view how they want to live, It's a question of how you want the space you live, how you want to define it, how you want to interact with that space. I think, people, when they know what they want, they are very capable of designing their own space.
Are there any materials or colors, though, that are particularly popular nowadays for residential, for example?
Well, that's, of course there will always be, but I think it's like an example is I'm more old-fashioned. I do a very Chinese kind of modern Chinese style for my own living space, and that's something that people visually, aesthetically, some people appreciate, but people may not necessarily want to live in that. That's the thing. So I think with certain like private spaces, it's we can identify better, with the way we kind of tailor it, for very specific personal needs,
We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about your new website, the ChineseCulture.com.
Thank you.
You're listening to Residence Messenger on Taipei Broadcasting Station.
Thank you.
如有长照服务需求、长照特别扣除额问题，请拨打1966长照专线，5分钟内通话免付费。 一通电话让长期照顾管理专员协助申请长期照顾服务及解答长期照顾特别扣除额相关问题。以上内容由台北市政府卫生局提供。
爸爸应酬不开车，黄色嘟嘟安全多。应酬喝酒不过量，安全回家最上道。爸爸要平安回家哦。
喝酒不开车，开车不喝酒哦。让我们一起尊重生命，拥抱亲情。
亲爱的民众，提醒您定期清除排油烟机内部油垢。烹煮食物时，切忌分心做其他事情，并注意人离火熄。且厨房附近应设置灭火器，操作时保持适当距离。当厨房火灾时，严禁以水灭火。油锅起火也千万不要移动油锅，以免翻覆造成火势扩大延烧。以上内容由台北市政府消防局提供。
亲爱的朋友，您还在吸烟吗？快拿着健保卡到戒烟门诊，或拨打戒烟专线0800636363。提醒您，最近兴起的电子烟、加热烟，因为没有浓浓的烟臭味，就被认为无害。其实已经证实，新兴烟品都有二手烟及三手烟的危害，甚至还有爆炸的风险。我是义工蔡依林，所有烟品都 get out。我拒烟，我骄傲。
教育部提醒大家，开学防疫不松懈，请家长每日量孩子体温，如有发烧请就医，并在家休息。上课时要全程佩戴口罩，采固定座位、固定成员。使用空调时保持通风良好。用餐时采个人套餐，使用隔板或维持社交距离，不并桌、不交谈。校园防疫不松懈，安心学习有保障。以上广告由教育部提供。
谁当家？
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 你当家？
谁当家？
谁当家？谁当家？
谁当家？我当家。
你当家？
我当家。
我当家。
到底谁当家？你来当家。
Welcome back to Residence Messenger on Taipei Broadcasting Station. Our guest today is Songshu Kang, architect and founder of ChineseCulture.com. Let's talk about the website. But before we do that, tell us a little bit about your own family's connection to artistic works. You've displayed some of these things at museums in Hong Kong and Taiwan as well. Tell us a little bit about this family history.
Well, my father, Song Xunlun, he's a 词 poet, you know. 词 is such a rarefied thing. I mean, most Chinese wouldn't even know what it is, you know. It's a poetic tradition from the Song dynasty, but it's very popular in the Qing dynasty too, you know. Anyway, so at that time, you know, my father and my grandfather and my great-grandfather, they all, you know, I mean, we are a very literary family, you know. And in the old days, you know, you all serve in the government in some different capacities and that sort of stuff. And of course, you know, the cultural world of China was a very small world in those days, and you would actually know most of the people there, you know. So that's why I was fortunate enough to be able to show some of the works in our family collection in different museums in the past, you know.
And these works are written poetry.
Well, I mean, they are paintings, calligraphy, manuscripts, scholars' objects, you know, all sorts, you know, because it's that's the world, you know, that's the world of the time. People would gift you these works, you know, as friends, you know. It's like an example, you know, it's like Picasso giving a painting to his painter friend, it's that kind of relationship, and I think that was a very beautiful world in those days. It was what Chinese culture is about, that friendship, that emotional connection.
When you decided to launch the website, what was the motivation? I mean, was it just to share these, to preserve them, to appeal to people who aren't so familiar with these objects? What were some of the motivations?
Well, I think it's sharing is very important, sharing it. But the website, the Chinese Heritage website, is a very specific one. It's about classical Chinese culture. So of course it's my passion to share this classical Chinese world, to be. It's not just about painting or calligraphy, it's about that world, that kind of the way of thinking, that world, the human stories of that, So I think to do that, and of course, in our time, like an example, the Taiwan schools, they don't teach that, If you go to mainland, they don't teach that neither. And then you go to Hong Kong, they don't teach that, It's very sad, but Chinese people, whoever they are now, the young people, they have very little opportunity to really get in touch with the classical world. I think that's the thing. And of course, the thing is also that it's a bilingual website. So, I hope that, Western people or people who do not read Chinese can actually also enjoy this, because my personal experience is that, a lot of Chinese arts and the cultural aspects, they're very enjoyable things. They're inspiring, they're refreshing. It gives you a different angle of looking at life, And if we can share that to a greater audience, then perhaps in a very kind of, optimistic view, that we can improve our society a bit, We can improve our existence in Taiwan. We can improve our existence in mainland China. We can improve our existence in Hong Kong.
Tell us about the sections of the website, how it's divided.
Yes, we have actually 12 rooms, so to speak, and then each room displays different types of objects. An example is we have a room about the Qing dynasty. We have a room about the Republic of China. So we have, paintings, calligraphy, objects of that period to show in these rooms. We have a room about teaware, actually not tea, but teaware, from the Ming to the Middle Qing dynasty. And then we have a room about scholars' objects. We have a room, we have actually 3 particular collection rooms, like the art collection of my father, the art collection of another gentleman called Tang Tianru, and another room of the collection of Wang Zhonghui, former defense minister in mainland China during the Sino-Japanese War. So we have another room about the journey of sinology from east to west, and so we have 12 rooms to show different types of stories, so to speak. And I think people, hopefully with that diversity, people can actually pick what they like,
Were the objects already available in photograph, or did it require you to take a whole new set of photographs for the objects?
Yes, I've been always taking more photographs. I have a lot of photographs because, it's something, I've done a lot of exhibitions in museums before, Probably I'm the one who have done most exhibitions individually speaking, in mainland China, if we look at the context of mainland China, Hong Kong, or Taiwan. I've probably launched 10 exhibitions in museums in the past. So all these things I've been thinking about for maybe 20, 30 years. And so now I kind of group everything together and added even more new things in it and new topics in it. And an example is the Sinology Voyage of Sinology is totally new and novel. It's never been shown in anywhere. So I think it's a vision of China, it's a vision of Chinese culture. It's a vision of what China was and what China can be,
You mentioned that the objects that are featured on the website come from different sources. Some are family, some are from the collections of other individuals and families. And you gave us this, such a wonderful vision of why you want to do this. Do you have friends or do you know other collectors that you approach them and you explain what you want to do? And are they ever reluctant? Do they ever say, it's a family heirloom, I'm not comfortable putting that on a website for everyone to see?
For up till now, actually, I mean, it has not been the case. I think a few friends I approached are naturally very enthusiastic about it. I think also, with classical Chinese culture, wherever you are now, whether you are in Taiwan, you're in mainland China, in Hong Kong, you don't really see it that much. You don't really, you don't see it in your neighbor's house. You don't really see it around you. Of course, if you go to museums, you'll see it. So I think it's a good opportunity for all people who love Chinese art, to actually on one hand to share to people, and the other that to be on the receiving end of it, So I think hopefully it's something that it can grow in popularity. I think,
You mentioned museums. What is their reaction to this kind of activity? Do they feel that it diverts attention from what museums do? Of course, we're in the COVID period. It's difficult to actually go to museums, but hopefully that'll resolve itself soon. Do museums welcome this, or do they see it as a form of competition to their own mission?
I think museums in general are very, open to that because, I think people who like Chinese traditional art, it's actually we have a kind of common bondage, and I think it's something that when we share that, I think it's something that people would be very happy to do. The thing also is that I think with an online museum, it's actually quite different to a real museum because we actually do things in great depth. We don't do it in great quantity as museums. An example, if you go to an exhibition in a museum, you see probably 100 pieces or 50 pieces. But if you go to an online museum, you probably see a few selected pieces, but we go into depth and explain it in depth. So I think it's a more rewarding experience in that sense, So you can ultimately be moved by certain pieces because the selection is small, and we try to communicate as much as we can about these pieces.
What kind of feedback have you received, not from people or people in the art or experts with Chinese classics, but from the public? What kind of random emails or messages have you gotten from people who have viewed the website?
Yes, I think it's been very encouraging. Thank God. Thank God. We are lucky because I think people, it's something very novel. I think we are probably the one, if not the first one, probably one of the first online museums in Taiwan. Maybe even so in mainland China or Hong Kong, So it's something novel, and then I think people appreciate that effort, Yes, I think we're lucky that. But of course, we hope that it can be, the people can pass on this online museum to friends, and more and more people can enjoy that. Yes.
Is there any political dynamic here? For example, do people in Taiwan question why would a Taiwan-based online museum want to share hundreds or thousands of years of Chinese art and culture? Does someone in Hong Kong or China say, well, why don't you move here and do it? Why are you doing that in Taiwan? What are the political dynamics with this project?
Well, I think this is a very kind of complicated question you asked me, because you see, here in Taiwan, I think people who totally deny their Chineseness, so to speak, are probably a minority, okay? Because most of my friends, it doesn't even come to mind. Even though, China is a very, like old China. It's, it's based on provinces, Every province has their pride, has their identity, so to speak. If you are from Zhejiang, you have your identity. You're from Anhui, you are from Taiwan. Everyone has their own individual identity. But we all use the same written language. We all speak the same language, So there's a lot of shared bond with each other. So people now, because of, here some people disapprove of mainland politics, so they actually become very negative about it. I mean, for ourselves, I mean, we don't necessarily agree with mainland politics, but we think that Chinese culture is above it all, And also that the other thing is, in mainland China, you would not have the freedom as I do to do an online website about online museum, because first of all, that would only be done by the government. And so, of course, when the government do anything, they have certain way of thinking. They want to propagate their politics, And I think because of that, they limited themselves to... there's a question of credibility too, here. So I think here in Taiwan, we have the freedom to do whatever we want. I don't even need to seek permission from the government here, It's whatever I enjoy. So I think that's a good. I think that is why our online museum is credible and better than what people can do in mainland China, Because now, in mainland China, even for an personal exhibition, you need approval from the government, right? So here we have a lot of options, So I think we have credibility, and that, it's something quite viable here. Yeah.
What are some of the upcoming initiatives for the website? For example, will there be specific online exhibitions in addition to the yes. What's displayed on an ongoing basis?
Yes. We have to be constantly thinking creatively how to make it interesting for everyone. There will be exhibitions. Well, we have a lot of short films too. People can, if you don't like to read or just see image, you can actually look at the films, and they are in Chinese and English. So we have, so an example is we are thinking of doing an issue on a particular kind of stone, a colorful stone called 雨花石, that's only found in Nanjing. Okay, and so that a good friend of mine is a great collector of that kind of stone. So I think if we do an exhibition on with our museum, that would be very interesting for people. And we have upcoming, we have many topics we will be highlighting. Like we'll be talking about Liang Qicao. We are going to, we have one issue on Flying Tigers, the American, volunteer group.
Not that we wanted to, we're going to get to politics there for sure.
I think that's not its history. It's long.
Yeah, but different. Each side wants to own the history, so that creates an interesting dynamic in that regard.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're living a very complicated world. Okay.
What about for? We've talked a little bit about the reaction from Taiwan to this, but what about younger people? For example, do you plan to work with schools here in Taiwan to help younger Taiwan people connect with the cultural history?
Yes, I think this is the aim. Eventually we want to be able to connect with young people and to share with them our own enjoyment of these arts. And I think it's also very important that in the future, when they grow up, they will have something that they actually own, that experience. I think if you live in Taiwan and if you are if you don't have that opportunity to enjoy Chinese art, it's a very impoverished situation. I mean, it's a very impoverished education. So, but sadly, I would say that the education syllabus now, they deprive young people of these opportunities because I mean, the government, they are not interested in promoting Chinese culture. In fact, they want to take that out completely, right? I mean, it's a very narrow-minded way of looking at education and looking at identity, looking at the whole geopolitics,
Well, we're almost out of time, Shu Kang. So before we go, one more chance to tell our listeners about the website. Anything you wish to add?
Well, I think it's the important thing is come to view it, nothing else. And then if you enjoy it, share it with your friends. That's critical for us.
And very quickly in Mandarin, what's the easiest way for people to find the website?
5000年 but it's 是个大写的5. It's like, it's not, we have a, how do I say it? 有个人字旁的5, okay? 人字旁的千, 5000年. So if you type 5000年, you'll be able to come to our website.
Terrific. Well, congratulations on the launch of the website, and thank you for coming in today.
Thank you very much, Ross. Thank you.
You've been listening to Residence Messenger on Taipei Broadcasting